Like to start with history. So, chapter 1, sources. In this lesson, you're going to learn about the meaning of sources and its importance, types of sources, importance of archaeological sources, and importance of oral sources in history. Before I start with the lesson, I would like to ask you a question. What do you know about your great grandparents? Who were they? Where were they living? What were they doing? Do you know about your family history? If not, today after the class, you talk to your parents or your grandparents and try to know more about your family history, about your grandparents and your great grandparents and your forefathers. So, if I give this task, how will you complete this task? You contact your parents or your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, and you will start asking questions. Who was my great grandfather? What was he doing? Where was he? When, in which period were they living? All these questions you will start asking. And your parents or grandparents may answer you, or they may show certain objects or things that are used by your great grandparents, or they may show you some pictures, an album to make you understand better. So, or you may be having some old clothes or old vessels which were used by your great grandparents. So, what are these all? These are all the things used by your great grandparents. Everybody, we all have such things at home. It may be our grandparents or their parents. We all have such things. So, what are these actually? These are all the sources for your family. So, by those sources, you'll be able to know and understand the history of your family. So, if this is the case with your family, you think about the sources to know about the history of our country, history of the world. So, how will we know all those? So, that is through the sources. In this lesson, let us know the sources which are required to know the history of the country and also of the world. Before that, let us know what is history. You all must be knowing already. So, history is the study of our past. It is about what people did and how they lived in the past. So, it is the systematic study of the past. In the picture, you can the see many things, coins, literary works, some vessels. So these are all the things which were used by the people who lived in the past. So history is the systematic study of the past life. Now you understood what is history. Then how is history written? Who writes history? It is the historians who write history. Then how do historians write history? On what basis do they write history? Historians are like advocates, lawyers, you must be knowing. How beautifully they present their arguments on the basis of evidences and the sources related to their case, right? They put forward their arguments on the basis of the evidences that they collect from their clients. In the same way, the historians also write history. How do they write history? They first collect sources, different sources they collect, like an advocate, even the historians collect sources. Then they critically examine all those sources. They examine, they think, they after examining the sources, they analyze about the sources, and then they'll come to the conclusion and record and write the histories. So how do the historians write history? First point, they collect sources. Then they critically examine. Then they do the analysis and they record on the basis of the available sources. If, and this is possible when the direct sources are available. What if there are no sources at all? Then, if there are no sources, then the historians need to make assumptions. They assume based on the available sources. How much sources are, how many sources are available. Based on that, they make certain assumptions, and then assuming they write history. So now you understood how do historians write history. If the direct sources are available, they collect sources, they critically examine, they analyze and they record. If the direct sources are not available, then they make assumptions. Then you must know what are sources. So sources are the remains of things used by the humans in the past life. So we all human beings need so many things in our life, right? To lead our life, we use so many things. We we make so many things. Even our people in the past who lived also used so many things to lead their life. And now they have remained, and now we are collecting those, and they are the sources to write the history. So human beings had created many facilities to lead their life since ancient times. If the things used by human beings in the past have remained, then they are called as the sources by historians. So sources are nothing but the remains of things used by the humans in the past life. In the picture, you can see a castle here, then inscriptions, then the things used, the jewelry used by the people, then certain coins also you can observe. So these are all the uh, things used by the people in the past. So these are the sources to write history. Along with this, not only the castles or some mud vessels, but also buildings, religious buildings, they are also considered as sources. Inscriptions, coins, arms, temples, forts, agricultural tools, they also they are also called as sources. Then the written documents and literary works are the main source of history. Even the written document and literary works which were written during the past are also the main source of history. So the materials needed for the writing of history are the primary sources. So what are the materials which are required to write history? They are called the primary sources. So primary sources can be divided into two groups. So what are primary sources? Primary sources are the materials that are required to write history. So such primary sources of history are divided into two groups. One is literary sources and another is archaeological sources. In this video, you know about the literary sources. In the next video, we we will discuss about the archaeological sources. So in the primary sources, literary sources. So literary sources again are of two types, written literature, oral literature. So in written literature again two types, native literature, foreign literature. Oral literature includes Lavanies, folk songs, folk tales, folk legends. So archaeological sources include monuments, coins, inscriptions and other ruins. Literary sources. Let us discuss about it. Literary sources, as I told you, there are two types, written literature and oral literature. Again, in written literature, there are two types. One is native literature and another is foreign literatures. A literature created by Indians in native language is known as native literature. Literature created by foreigners who visited India is known as foreign literature. And these literary works are very important. Why? Because a literary work represents the then existing aspects of life either directly or indirectly. So the any literary work if we take that will represent the social, political, religious aspects of the period at the period in which the literary work was written. So that is why literary works are very important. As I told you, native literature. The literature created by Indians in native language is called as the native literature. So in you all know in India there are many languages which are in use. So in India you will find literary works in Sanskrit, Prakrit, Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Hindi, Marathi, Kashmiri, Gujarati, Oriya and in many other native languages. And these are all the sources. All these literary works which are written in different languages are also the sources. I can give certain examples. So Kautilya, who was the prime minister in the court of Chandragupta, wrote Arthashastra. Then King Hala, so who was a Shatavahana king, he wrote Gatha Saptashati. Then Vishakadatta, a Sanskrit poet, he wrote Mudra Rakshas. Kalhana, a Kashmiri author, wrote about rulers of Kashmir. His famous work was Rajatarangini. Then Banapatta, poet in the court of Harshavardhana, wrote Harsha Charita. Then Chand Bardai was a poet. He wrote Prithvirajaraso. Then Pampa, a Kannada Jain poet who is known as Adikavi, wrote Vikramarjuna Vichya. So all these are the native literary works which are very important to write history. These are all the literary sources of history. Now you understood that these works represent then contemporary social, religious, economic, cultural, and political life of people. That's why they are very important. You must be knowing all these literary works and their author. These are very important. Foreign literature. So as I already told you, the literary works written by foreign visitors are known as foreign literature. So many foreigners who visited India as travelers, ambassadors, businessmen, officials and missionaries, they have recorded their observations and experiences in their works. And these works are considered as foreign literature and they're very important to write the history. And they serve as source of writing history. So who are those? Let us know some foreign uh, literary works and their authors. Megasthenes, he wrote Indica. He was a Greek historian and a diplomat who visited India, wrote a book called Indica. Then Huan Sang, a Chinese traveler, wrote Siyuki. Then Fahian, a Chinese scholar, wrote Gokoki. Ptolemy, Egyptian astronomer and a geographer, he wrote a work called Geography. Farishta, historian of Persian origin, wrote Tariq-e-Farishta. So Mughal Emperor Babur wrote Tazk-e-Babri. All these are the examples for foreign literature, and these are all very important to write the history, that too Indian history. You are talking about Indian history here. So these are all serve as the sources, that is written literary sources to write history of India. Then the limitations in the written literature was exaggeration and hyperbole and loyalty to one's master are apparent in native literature. In native literature, the literary works used to exaggerate the kings usually. They used to they used to exaggerate their kings. They used to praise them, and they were loyal to their masters. So this was the drawback which was absurd in native literary works. But in foreign literature, many misgivings were recorded because of the lack of local knowledge, because they were all foreigners and they did not have the knowledge of uh, local their knowledge. Many misgivings were recorded. So these are the two drawbacks of foreign and native literature. One is exaggeration, hyperbole and loyalty to one's master was apparent in native literature, and in foreign literature many misgivings are recorded. So now you understood about the uh, sources, meaning of sources, meaning of history, then primary sources. In that you learnt about literary sources, written literature and oral literature. Oral literature we will discuss in the next video. Now I have given you an assignment. You need to collect names of 10 native literature and their authors and 10 foreign literature and their authors. Do not copy from the book. I want the names which are not mentioned in the textbook. You can search even in the internet. So write in the last 10 pages of the classwork. You keep the last 10 pages to write the assignments. Whenever I ask you to write in the last 10 pages, you will be writing assignment questions there only. You don't need to buy a separate book to write assignment. You'll be writing in your classwork only, and separate keep 10 pages of the last 10 last pages of your notebook. Thank you so much. Have a good day.